episode of SundownSurmisings, you may notice that my partner is not actually Jeff Deming, right? PJ is on assignment this week, and hoping to hear back from him next week. This is episode 40 of SundownSurmisings. It is February 19th, and the incredible woman sitting next to me, to my right, your left, is a well-known speaker and author and one of my favorite people in the world, Cheri Gregory. She joins us tonight. We're going to be going through a story of hers and looking at a passage maybe in a whole new light that you haven't seen before. So, thank you for being a guest on our show, and for all the 3 people who'll be watching or whatever at some point in time. Thank you. And where are we going? What are we doing?
Well, for my sake, and maybe those who are watching, remind us of the theme.
Okay. Well, since the start of January, since 2021, we decided we would do a theme of a new start. Just episodes in the Bible or pericopes in the Bible where something happens, maybe it's a new name or a new agenda or a new direction in life. They're like, oh! And they make a turn. Maybe it's a slight turn, maybe it's a great turn. We've looked at a series of them. If you haven't, go back and look. Note down below. There's a whole bunch of really cool ones. The guy being laid down, the paralytic through the roof, or Zacchaeus who climbed up, and all of those people, whether they were going up or coming down, had a change in their life after they met Christ, or something happened that was like, oh, whole new world. We looked at Jacob, we looked at Joseph,
So I don't know that the portion we're going to look at is a true pericope, but we're going to look at John 9.
Okay, my favorite book.
And I know this story has been covered many times, in many ways, and so there's a lot of things that we could say about it that have been said many times before, but the pericope I want to look at is specifically at the parents of this young man.
Okay. Yeah, I don't think we've tackled that. I know we haven't tackled it here.
Okay.
So John chapter 9.
John chapter 9, and do you want me to read or do you want to read?
You decide.
Okay.
Either way, I'll put the NIV down below. I'm reading from the King James. If you want to follow along, the NIV will be down below. And you have, I don't know.
I have
the NIV. So it'll match somewhat, or pretty close, because there's different...
I have a pink journaling Bible with lots of room and lots of highlighting and notes in it. So, all right, well, why don't you go ahead?
Well, I have notes in mine too, but they're just written on it. I'm not sure if it's supposed to be, whatever. All right, so we're going to be in John chapter 9. And again, for those, most people know that's New Testament. It's the 4th book in the New Testament, 4th gospel. John chapter 9, we're looking at verses 18 through 23. As where I'll start, in verse 18. But the Jews, that doesn't mean the Jewish people, it means the Jewish leaders. Mm-hmm. But the Jews did not believe concerning this guy, that he had been blind and received his sight, until they called his parents of him who had received his sight. And they asked them, the parents, is this your son, who you say was born blind? And how can he see now? Now his parents answered and said, well, we know this is our son, and we know that he was born blind. Verse 21. But as for how he can see, we don't know. Or who has opened his eyes, we don't know. He is of age. Ask him. He will speak for himself. Verse 22. These words spoke his parents because they feared the Jewish leaders. For the Jews had already agreed that if any man would confess that Jesus was Christ, the Messiah, he would be put out of the synagogue. Therefore, his parents said, he is of age, ask him.
So the note I have in my margin here from a number of months ago, I've been studying this for years, of course, but is fear in response to a healing when there should have been joy. That what really jumped out at me is the parents said this because they were afraid of the Jewish leaders. So how old would the son have been? Do you have an age range for that?
Since it says his of age, we have only 2 markers, and I'm going to suspect the later one. He's either at 12, 13, had his bar mitzvah, some or past that at least, right? Or he's past 30. Those are the 2 major age marks. And to be considered sort of an adult in the society would be more the 30, because to be a guardian or a respecter of the Torah and expected those sort of adult, he'd have to be, again, 13 at the bar mitzvah for him. So he's at the youngest, his would be probably mid-teenagers. But I'm actually going to suspect, since he was well known and it's such a shock to everybody in the community seems to know him, and that he was out by the temple begging, that he had been there a while. This is another story. So I always lean to the fact that I think he was older, probably in his early 30s.
Okay. So the other thing I'm curious is, and not that we have any way of knowing, but how did those parents know that he was born blind? And I'm just, PJ always talks about the white spaces around the black letters. And so I think back to when the child was born, and one of the things that, you probably remember, I remember thinking back to when we had our babies and we would be feeding them, there was this mirroring that would go on.
Yeah. True. You're looking at them and
you
they're
look
staring
down
back
at them
and you move
they
and
look
they track.
up. Exactly. And so, when I read this, the fear of the Pharisees at a time that they should have been filled with so much joy, I think about what it must have been like, whether they realized it immediately or it took a few months for them to realize, hang on, he turns his entire head with his ears when he hears sounds, but he's not tracking with his eyes. And, we
call a vacant stare, because the eye muscles don't actually track, because they don't know what they'd be tracking to.
Exactly. And so at some point in this day, there is a scene that's not recorded.
Yeah. Because it says he goes, well, it doesn't say he goes home, I suppose.
No.
But it says the neighbors, therefore, so it implies he went home.
Yeah. And so I think also about when he was little, how would he have known what his parents looked like?
Yeah.
If his mom was holding him, he was reaching up to feel her face. If dad was holding him, he was reaching up. And so all he had known of his parents up until this day, this magical day, this miraculous, sorry, it wasn't magical, it was a miraculous day, is he had known their voices and he had touched their faces. And after Christ made it possible for him to see, there was a moment that he went home or encountered his parents wherever they were, and he could go up to them. And of course, I'm going to imagine him going up to his mom and holding her face in his hands, and maybe going up to his dad and familiarizing his eyes with what he'd only been able to touch.
Oh wow!
For 30 years.
Yeah. We often talk about putting a name to a face.
Yes.
But putting a face to a feel.
Yeah. And what would that have been like for that family? And now put with this the years of quiet, I'm assuming quiet guilt and shame because of this belief that if their child was blind, it meant either or both of them had sinned. And so maybe they were each separately thinking, well, maybe it was me, maybe it was something from the past, maybe they were secretly thinking, was it something he did, was it something she, So all these years, 30 years of wondering who had done wrong, that God had visited on their son. And so this is a day that not only does their son come to them and say, Dad, you are more handsome than I realized. Or, Mom, you are more beautiful than I could have thought. And they both realized it wasn't us.
Yeah. Well, I'm not sure they realized that. And the reason is because the disciples who are hanging around Jesus are voicing the common opinion.
Sure.
And the Pharisees. And so these people, I don't think they wanted to believe it, but they must have, because look at the ultimate respect they pay these people who fed them this lie, right? They have heard this alternate reality. They had listened to these words and they took them to heart. And my guess is they blame themselves, because holding your own child, you wouldn't want to, you couldn't. I mean, you'd see this as innocent child. It's like, how could this child have had this kind of to sin, and that would be impossible. So it's got to be me. It's got to be, one of us. And the amazing amount of guilt, and what I hadn't thought of when you're talking about that. Jesus is the only one who has this clarity. But can you imagine? He went home, and he could tell them, "It's not you. It's not me." And the person who did this said that.
Yeah.
It's like that person has authority. And I think in their heart they wanted to believe it. They wanted to trust it. But what I struggle now is that because they're distancing themselves from the Jews, because they're afraid of being separated from their community, that separates them from the healing, which separates them from forgiveness or getting rid of the shame. It's like they're really stuck between buying this lie and bound to that guilt and shame, or going with their son and the guy who healed them and freedom from lies. Wow.
Yeah. So it was too good to be true for them.
Yeah.
And they don't seem to appear in front of the Pharisees at the same time.
I think your insight is more accurate because it reflects what these guys do. Try to split, cut, divide. And there is that notion that they call the parents, grill them, see if your story matches this. Somebody made this up, right? They're trying to look for anything to break it down. There is nothing to break down because it's the truth. And then they summon this guy in and try to grill him, and thinking, oh, we made headway. His parents have disowned him in a sense, right? Your parents aren't backing up your story. What do you got to say for yourself? And he's like, and that's where my favorite lines in Scripture come.
And
he's like, all right, you know what? I don't, and it's almost like, and I don't want to mean, because he could, I think, understand his parents' struggle. But it's almost like he's like, I've been on my own for years.
Nothing left to lose.
Nothing left to lose. I'm going to tell you guys what and his reasoning is brilliant. He takes their alternate reality and he quotes it back to them. Says, that's funny, I've heard this all my life. So if what you say is true, then this. And they're left, they realize they've got no out. And of course, they kick him out. But I'm getting ahead of myself. So
yeah. So really, the thing I see in all of this is the way that the interference of the Pharisees, their desire to take Jesus down, and it was a miracle that the entire community should have been celebrating.
Yeah.
Especially
because it never happened before.
Exactly. It should have been a high day for everybody to be celebrating, and instead. It was a cause of fear in these parents. And, it doesn't tell us anything else about them, but it makes me wonder. And then, of course, in verses 39 through 41, Jesus said, for judgment I have come into this world, so the blind will see and those who see will become blind. And here's the Pharisees again. Some Pharisees who were with him heard him say this and asked, what? Are we blind too? And verse 41, Jesus said, if you were blind, you would not be guilty of sin. So he totally nails that point home. But now that you claim you can see, your guilt remains.
Because you really can't. You're lying.
Yeah. And the Pharisees as ruiners, as destroyers of this moment that should have been such a beautiful celebration, reunion. It's a moment of reunion.
Yeah. And I wonder what the conversation was in that house that night. Yeah. I mean, to have decades of programming begin to be undone, because that's the real issue. They lived with this. They'd seen this. He'd spent his life begging, which is where they found him, right? The disciples and him, and everything about his life was literally a do-over, a new start, a new beginning. And this, interesting, I really had thought of it, this is the chapter John uses to lead into the other sheep I have, which are not of this fold, and they hear my voice.
Yes.
Right? And they don't see me, they hear my voice, and they follow. I suppose maybe the lesson out of this is that sometimes we get a new start, right? A new turn of relief. And other people aren't happy with our change. Whether it's we used to be comfortable this way and now we view life this way, or we vote this way, or we see this way, or we believe this way, or we act this way. And other people will find some way to tear it down or to minimize or to make fun of. And because that's true. Nobody in this story is celebrating. And it should have been somebody. Disciples, the people at the pool of Siloam. Somebody should have, but all you get is questions. Is this the guy? No, it looks like it's the guy. I don't think it's the guy. His neighbors, everybody's like, and nobody, there's no ticker tape parade, there's no ta-da! And the only friend he has is the one who starts the chapter and ends the chapter, who seeks him out, is Jesus. And, well, maybe that's another lesson right there. I don't know. I don't know. Wow. That was. I don't know if you've ever thought of that before. That look at the perspective from the parents. I really haven't immersed myself and thought of it from a thing, but I took it a different way. That was kind of a new thought, that in the midst of a new change, maybe that's something you're doing. Maybe 2021 brought a conviction, like you're going to start that, I don't know, exercise plan or daily devotion plan or diet plan, or you're going to start reading both sides of the news, or you're going to try to deprogram yourself from other sides, or whatever it is. And maybe friends and family and people you trusted before, people who maybe you looked up to, are trying to tear that down. I can't tell you what's right or wrong, but I can tell you that there is one voice in this chapter to listen to. It's the same voice that speaks to you and to me. It's that voice that says, would you like to know who to worship? And the man says, just show me. And if you listen, you'll hear a voice behind you, still small voice speaking. This is the way. Walk ye in it. Hey, thank you again for joining us. And our guest this week, next week, PJ should be back from assignment. But episode 40 tonight, episode 41 next week. We've just got a few more before we wrap up our whole year. And we look forward to seeing you again, Sundown Surmisings, next week. Thank you.